A desert planet with twin suns.
Why do I sense we've picked up another pathetic life form?
Use my knowledge. Much to learn. You still have.
Welcome back to Twin Sun Talks, folks. I'm your host, Jonah Liu. Thank you so much for listening, and welcome to our third volume of the most prominent and important alien species to know in Star Wars. And honestly, we're kind of moving out of prominence and into kind of obscurity a little bit with this episode. We're gonna still be encountering some like fairly prominent species moving forward, but these are much less prominent, but they're more prominent than like super obscure. Like that we get to interact with multiple characters of these species, or at least that's what I'm trying to do. So in this episode, we're going to be going through Toydarians, Gungans, Neimoidians, Weequays, Nicktoes, and Aqualish. So without further ado, let's dive into ARC Trooper training.
Gentlemen, who wants to be an ARC Trooper? I do, sir!
Alrighty, so if y'all haven't listened to my first and second volumes, they're back somewhere. I don't know. I think that they might be episodes 41 and 48, but that is a shot in the dark. They're both in the 40s, and both are named the same things. The only difference is Volume 1 versus Volume 2. So if you'd like to catch up on those, feel free to go ahead and listen to those after you're done with this. These aren't, the order isn't particularly important, so I'd encourage you to keep listening to this and then go back and catch up on those whenever you are done. So the first species that I'm going over today are Toydarians. Now, Toydarians are a winged species of sentients who prefer to fly rather than walk. They are native to the planet of Toydaria, and they are also immune to Jedi mind tricks. So kind of like the Hutts in our previous episode, they are able to form a sort of protective barrier around themselves using their midichlorians in order to prevent their minds from being manipulated by Force wielders. They speak Basic, and they hold tenets of openness and hospitality, as we see in the episodes surrounding them in the Clone Wars. Members of this species include Watto, who is the slave owner of Anakin Skywalker in The Phantom Menace, and then King Katunko, who is the king of the planet, who we get to see quite a bit of during the Clone Wars, especially surrounding his kind of debate on whether or not to join the Republic. He's in the very first episode of the Clone Wars with Yoda. But Toydaria largely tried to remain neutral and ultimately, spoiler alert, ended up joining the side of the Republic after much deliberation, seeing their humanitarian efforts at the behest of Senator Bail Organa and Representative Jar Jar Binks. Speaking of Jar Jar, our next species that we're going over are the Gungans. So the Gungans were a semi-aquatic species native to the planet of Naboo, and they were at odds with the human colonists until approximately 32 BBY, or the events of the Phantom Menace. They are formidable warriors with relatively advanced melee weaponry, as we see with the Boombas, and they are also extremely prominent in underwater combat, as we see in the Clone Wars during the Mon Cala arc. They are called in to be reinforcements for the overwhelmed Mon Calamari and Republic forces. They speak broken Basic, as you know, with Jar Jar. Mr. Jar Jar Binks. And so it's like, it's understandable and coherent, but it's not true Basic. Members of this species include Jar Jar Binks, Captain Tarpals, and Boss Nass. And I know a lot of people I've heard a lot of people say that they thought that Boss Nass was like a completely different character or species altogether. No, he's just a super fat Gungan. He's the guy at the beginning of Phantom Menace with like the jowls and the green skin, the leader of the Gungans. Anyways, Moving right along, next up we have Nemoidians. And so Nemoidians, we are introduced to them in The Phantom Menace. They have milky skin. They are pretty bony and conniving humanoids. They are the primary tenants of the Trade Federation, and they are known for their greed and cowardice. They speak Basic, and they are native to the planet of Nemoidia and later Katunko, which were both very lavish and rich worlds. They're kind of interesting because they have like kind of a life cycle, kind of like an insect, where they start as a larvae and then they grow up. Kind of cool. Members of this species include Newt Gunray, who's probably the most prominent of the species that is portrayed in Star Wars, Rune Hako, and then Loch Durd. All Trade Federation cronies, because we don't really see many Nemoidians outside of the context of the Trade Federation. But yeah, no, they were the kind of stereotype was that Nemoidians were extremely greedy and selfish, but also very cowardly and self-serving. So moving right along, next up we have Weequays. Weequays are humanoid with leathery skin and small facial horns. They were native to the planet, I'm going to butcher this, Shriller. And once again, at some point, I promise y'all, I will have an ASMR style episode where I just mispronounce Star Wars vocabulary. And this would be one of the ones that I'm trying to pronounce. So it's spelled Srillur. Shriller. I don't know. But as a sweeping generalization, Weequays worked in the business of piracy, and they were also widely mercenaries or bounty hunters. They speak Basic, and they were largely employed by gangsters like the Hutts, and were notorious, like I said, for being bounty hunters or pirates. So basically, they're very kind of skeevy and once again kind of conniving, scheming, very cunning, but also very stupid creatures. And so members of the species include Hondo Ohnaka and his pirate stronghold, as well as some skiff guards from Jabba's palace that we see in the Return of the Jedi. But obviously they are strong in numbers, and they are smart enough to have captured Count Dooku, Anakin Skywalker, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and to have overtaken the likes of General Grievous, also Darth Maul and Savage Opress. Like, we see all of this stuff happen, but they are portrayed as very incompetent individuals. But at the same time, their intelligence and their cunning is put on display to show why they are such a formidable force, and I think that's a super interesting thing. So next up we have Nicktoes, who are once again humanoid with leathery skin and small facial horns, but they have beaked faces, so they're not exactly like Weequays. They are very similar to and often confused with Weequays. They are native to the planet of Kintan, and they are also largely employed by gangsters as security. And they speak Basic, and honestly, this is one of the first species where it's like, okay, they're mainly background characters. There's really only been one prominent main character that's been a Nikto. But we see them as background characters in a lot of these kind of like gangster underworld type scenes where they are guards, especially in the Clone Wars. They're very prominently featured, but you can see them on Jabba's skiff guards on Jabba's sail barge, as well as basically kind of like the more athletic counterparts to the Gamorrean guards in the Hutt services in media like the Clone Wars, and also the stronghold that the Mandalorian breaks into to rescue the child. In episode 1 of season 1 of The Mandalorian, all of the foes that he faces off with were primarily Nicktoes warriors. So members of the species, that being said, include Gungray, who is the most prominently featured main character that was in Nicktoes. He is the Jedi in the episode supply runs of season 3. I think that's episode 3 of season 3 of the Clone Wars. I could be wrong though. Who is the Jedi General who is fighting alongside Champs and Duela and the Freedom Fighters on Ryloth, and he is the one who is in charge of the Outer Rim garrison. Second in command is Captain Keeley, who is one of my favorite clones, and he's a super cool character. I won't spoil how that episode ends, but that name might be a little indicative of the end that he meets, as his name is Gungray, which is one of my favorite, my brother and I's kind of inside jokes when it comes to Star Wars. But then also, like I said, the skiff guards on those adjacent to Jabba's sail barge are also Nicktoes warriors. So, last species that we have for this episode are Aqualish. So, same vein where it's like we haven't really seen many characters that are super prominently featured that are Aqualish, but we see a lot of background characters that are, so I felt justified in incorporating them into this list. Aqualish are a sentient humanoid species native to the planet Ando. Some members of their species have 2 eyes, some of them have 4. They have bald heads and skin of various muted colors, kind of like gray, black, brown. They also have distinct facial protrusions, which is the only way that I could describe them, but I think that if y'all saw it, y'all be like, oh, that's what he meant, but it kind of, I don't even know how to properly verbalize what they look like, but it's almost like 2 butt cheeks on their face is the best that I could, that's the best I could do. This is probably the most fun fact, though, and it's that they have red blood that doesn't cauterize. And the reason for this is that we see one member of their species, get their arm cut off by Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope. And what we see is when it's on the ground, this arm has blood coming from it, which never happens with lightsabers because the weapon is so hot that it cauterizes the wound immediately after severing a limb. So, but this was the first time we had ever seen a lightsaber used on an organic individual. So, moving forward, George made that change, but in order to kind of explain why this one occurrence showed someone bleeding, the lore has been kind of altered to make it so that Aqualish have blood that doesn't cauterize. So therefore, even if they have a run-in with a lightsaber or a weapon like a lightsaber, their blood, they're still going to bleed because their blood is physically incapable of cauterizing. So members of the Aqualish species speak Aqualish, so they don't speak Basic. It's kind of almost sounds like a walrus, is kind of what their language sounds like. Members of the species include Ponda Baba, which is the Aqualish that we meet in A New Hope, who gets their arm cut off by Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then the robbers that Cara Dune takes down in The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 4. It's kind of our first reintroduction to her. And she is essentially taking down a group of robbers from that are looting the armorer's kind of stronghold. She comes in and stops them, and so that the species of that gang of robbers is Aqualish. That's about all that I have on that, but this wouldn't be a proper episode if I didn't leave y'all with just a little bit more. Alrighty, so what I got for y'all today is that in A New Hope, R2D2 and C3PO escape the Tantive 4, which is the ship that we first see come into view, first shot in Star Wars over Tatooine, and this is the ship with all the engines and everything that Princess Leia was escaping the Battle of Scarifon. And so the kind of escape pod that R2 and C3PO utilized to escape that ship and get away from the Imperials and essentially get the Death Star plans to Ben Kenobi was a Class 6 escape pod. So that's a little dose of useless Star Wars knowledge for you. But I just thought that was a little interesting, and that's a fun party trick to pull out. And it's like, if someone's like, well, what do you know about Star Wars? It's like, well, did you know that R2-D2 and C-3PO escaped the Tantive 4 utilizing a Class 6 escape pod? And then they're like, wow, you're super cool. And then, yeah, that's probably what people say. I don't know. But anyways, that's about all that I have for today's episode. Make sure that you tune in this Friday. I am having my 3rd edition of The Ability to Speak Does Not Make You Intelligent, and Scott Fonseca is going to be on. We are playing some games, and then he's taking on the rank of master. It's going to be a blast. Make sure that you tune in for that. And if you haven't already, go ahead and go back and listen to the other 2 editions that I have so far. The first one, I went over kind of an in-depth review of Star Wars Visions, which is the anime series that came out a few months ago with my roommate John Grimes and then our high school friend Hamza Al-Asadi. And then the 2nd edition is my good friend Sean and my brother Jeb, and we go through a few games, and then we talk about some fan film memories that we have, unfinished fan film memories that like we used to make back in the day. And then at the end of all of these, I have a rank of master quiz. So make sure you go ahead and check those out. So yeah, that's all that I have for today's episode. You've taken your first steps into a larger world. May the Force be with you, and I will see y'all in the next episode. Bye, friends.